I give you a
3D Sonic game. Sonic R.
Oh, come on! He's history's greatest monster!
So, Sonic R is probably one of the most memed on games ever. And that's not for illegitimate reasons. The game was touted as being the second part in what Sega was calling Project Sonic, which actually really wasn't anything other than a fancy label for a release window that would see the launch of 2 Sonic games on Saturn. This was more than likely a way for Sega to save face after murmurs began to sound surrounding the cancellation of Sonic Extreme, the would-be premier 3D Sonic the Hedgehog experience that had been languishing in a development hell for the better part of 3 years. Sonic R could have been the best racing game ever, but the game wouldn't have been any the safer from scrutiny for being the only wholly original 3D Sonic title on the Saturn. It's funny because at the time the critical reception for Sonic R could have actually been considerably worse. Maybe it was some kind of recency bias, but the Biz had no issues holding up Sonic R as okay. Really, the only bona fide negative review I could dig up comes out of this old GamePro. However, following the scrutiny of the pissed-off, angry hardcore gamer era of web culture, Sonic R has gone down in history as flat-out bad.
It's not good!
I've put in my time with the game for this video plenty of times over now, and I'm here to tell you definitively that once and for all, Sonic R is... it's alright. I'll confess that I'm going to be one of the first in line whenever it is that they start handing out official laminated Sonic apologist cards. I mean, look at this shelf I actually have in my actual house. But setting that aside, Sonic R is seriously one of the most harmless games I've ever played. I'm not going to throw myself over coals for its sake or anything, but I've always side-eyed the notion of lumping it in with the usual suspects of hyperbolic internet best ever, worst ever discourse. I would wager that much of Sonic R's modern reputation comes from its less than perfect first impression. For one, this title screen won't really be impressing anybody. It's the exact same JPEG that's on the box. Largely static title screens were still around. There had been efforts to jazz up games' title screens since the NES days, but I would say that things didn't really start to pick up steam until around the back half of the 16-bit days and into early 3D. And Sonic R's large, rotating, reflective R only got less impressive with each passing day. And then of course, there's the music. Yeah, I'll speak on this in more detail in a moment, but for now, I think saying I understand how this can be off-putting gets the point across well enough. Then, of course, there is playing the game. Within the literal first 5 seconds of the game, you turn a curve that reveals a massive disconnect between the character on screen and the analog control in your hand. And then it happens again, and then again, and a couple more times. I mean, look, I'm not hamming this up for the video or nothing. This is me genuinely just trying to control this character in a 3D space with an analog stick like I have literally every other time in my life. It's that hard to grab these ring trails. There is a jump, but it carries a certain rigidity to its length and angle which seemingly exists only to frighten the player away from relying on it. You can only adjust it so far with the control stick. It's even if you have the privilege of using a control stick, considering that the stock Sega Saturn controller looks like this. Not like that's an excuse, more than enough examples of serviceable 3D controls through the means of a D-pad have been present. I mean, Croc just came out, man. The controls don't really complement the level design at all either. The track is loaded with forking paths, alternate routes, vague signposting, and near nauseating curves that are so difficult to imagine, that are so difficult to manage you would think that there are magic hedgehog magnets in the wall or something. There is a near universal first Sonic R race experience, one that includes bouncing off walls, careening around corners, kinda just being overwhelmed in general. There's this one-off speed boost, seemingly useless floating coins, unlockable doors that reveal, hey, the game has Chaos Emeralds now. It's really quite the trip compared to your Mario Karts or Daytona USAs. And then there's the music again. Any assumptions that hammy vocal track was a one-off for the title screen are rendered false. And while that track was at least focused around supersonic racing, this in-game track features lyrics about running away from your worries and feeling the sunshine, all layered over a bright and poppy instrumental that adds up to a listening experience that, never really sat well with the capital G gamer crowd. This very first impression became synonymous with Sonic R, as talk of its terrible controls and cringe AF soundtrack sounded the internets abound, finding itself added to the pantheon of the countless other would-be shitload of fuck video games. So, part of this video for me is bringing a bone to pick with the entire mid to late 2000s internet video game reviewer scene and style. While I'll always cherish the Screw Attack era for having existed at all during the time, there's no denying just how surface level this style of critique was. The time was that you really could only capture about 15 minutes worth of gameplay while nitpicking the game's WTF qualities, having an elitist circle jerk about achieving real gamer status during your childhood, or fuck it, just make gay jokes about two beloved comic characters you had been too American to have ever heard of before. Despite that, there is quite a place in my heart for the era when the angry video game nerd was the standard, but I definitely think that there's been some kind of aftershock with how many games now have an undeserving reputation in either direction because of it. I don't want to oversell how targeted Sonic R was during those days, but I definitely remember it being a part of it. Ugh, and they always did that stupid fucking WTF Japan thing. Were they on crack when they made this game? I guess we know why Mario really likes those mushrooms. I want to reiterate that I'm not trying to do some kind of Sonic fan salsa dance to defend this game from criticism. I just want to play my part in making Sonic R's reputation slightly less tarnished. I say that being more than willing to recognize the concession that many Sonic the Hedgehog games are put up to bat via means of a good once you get used to it defense. It's not unreasonable to insist that sometimes you're just going to have to meet a game halfway to see its true value, but you know, there's halfway and then there's all the way. Sonic R, in my opinion, being one of those games that, yes, you're gonna have to meet halfway. I mean, just look at it. Would you think that it was going to be an ordinary racing game? Yeah, you'd still think the fucking controls suck. There's about a football field's worth of distance between the level of control that a game like Super Mario 64 allows within its 3D space and Sonic R's. Home console 3D gaming was still very young in November 1997, but even by then we had a pretty good idea of how controlling a little guy inside a world like this ought to feel, but Sonic R misses just about every last mark possible. For lack of a better expression, Sonic and Company feel like vehicles. The gradual acceleration, the strict commitment to either forward or backward traversal, the turning in particular, the trajectory of each turn genuinely feels confined to the angles of a front-wheel drive motor vehicle, worlds apart from a realistic shift in direction controlled by one's head and shoulders. Now, this was developer Traveler's Tales' first foray into polygonal 3D gaming. Maybe they just fucked it up. Well, maybe, but not necessarily. You see, the groundwork for Sonic R was initially laid when Traveler's Tales was approached by Sega to develop a Formula 1 racing game for the Saturn, one to rival Bizarre Creations' PlayStation title, which had become something of a breakout hit for the F1 genre. Work on this Formula 1 project would continue through the production of the game's engine, as well as a small number of 3D assets. It was around this time that Sonic Extreme, the would-be flagship Sonic title for Sega Saturn, was cancelled, leaving the console without either its premier Sonic game or a holiday 1997 smash hit. Not wanting to abandon either the sunk cost of Traveler's Tales' progress on the Formula 1 title or the media hype of a holiday Sonic release, Sega directed TT to readapt their F1 engine for use with a racing game using the likeness of their very own Sonic the Hedgehog, thus leading to the aforementioned vehicular style of control. I bring this all up not to make excuses for Sonic R's shitty controls, but to establish some context. It's easy to experience the controls as a "what were they thinking" moment, the answer to which being that they were making a Formula 1 game, man. The game even has a full-on dedicated accelerate button, which, hey, if we're doing that whole meeting things halfway thing I brought up earlier, I would argue the use of is imperative. Really, just don't use the control stick to accelerate. You're gonna have a bad time. Treating acceleration and steering as separate inputs like the game encourages, rather than nightmarishly forcing the two together, reframes what appears to be a blind misfire of 3D control into something that actually makes some kind of sense with practice. Seriously, just hold B and concern yourself just with turning and jumping. Hell, there are even rinky-dink drifting mechanics controlled by the shoulder buttons. Is it a foolproof control scheme? No. But it is one of those things that, when met on its own terms, rather than steamrolled over with ill-gotten preconceptions, allows for, at the very least, a much more accessible experience than previously let on. And per usual, with the mastering, or I guess accommodating, of a game's controls comes exploration. As I alluded to earlier, Sonic R's track design is a little funky. The game forgoes typical racing conventions of a fasty-fast main track and a slowy-slow off-track in favor of more open-ended, elevation-tiered courses that do possess what can be described as a main forward path, but don't punish players for straying outside of. Off of the beaten path can be found shortcuts, power-ups, rings, and other collectibles. The level design does a decent job of telegraphing distinguished routes based on road forks and changes in elevation, and while the sheer girth of each track's in-game roadways may seem overwhelming, the game does a more than serviceable job of funneling players along with the course, keeping them from becoming too separated from other racers, all while retaining those classic Sonic-y environment motifs such as loops, steep inclines, and springs that we've come to love. Though I will admit that the level design can push the boundaries of challenging a player's intuition and come to rely on guesswork or raw rote memorization instead. In other words, the levels are designed like a Sonic game. The draw of Sonic the Hedgehog's games on the Genesis was always the character's blitzing speed, though the long-lasting appeal of the game was becoming familiar with each zone's multi-tiered pathways combined with that speed. It wasn't a perfect approach, but at its core is what ultimately distinguished these games from the more established platforming conventions of the time, and one that, when properly understood by those that find the franchise in their hands, ultimately reveals the long-lasting appeal and longevity of this series and its trademark game design. Sonic R's track design is not a one-to-one conversion of Genesis level design, but it's certainly evocative of it, if nothing else. It's easy to feel like you're being helplessly thrown around your first go, but it's more than possible to explore a decent amount of track within one full race. And while Sonic R's tracks don't possess that same sort of skill check tier system of the main series level design, becoming familiar with the courses of Sonic R is still ultimately going to push you closer to the game's skill ceiling. This design motif is further strengthened by Sonic R's in-game collectibles system. Scattered around each track are those floating Sonic coins that I brought up earlier, that when collected grant the player a race against one of the game's unlockable racers, and you unlock them when you beat them. Alongside those Sonic coins are the series' staple collectibles, the Chaos Emeralds. Much like the Genesis titles, the Emeralds appear initially as nothing more than collectibles for collectibles' sake. They're hidden away not by routes necessarily blocked off by a skill or control check, but instead blockaded by doors that open when a racer passes holding the projected ring count. I think these are neat, not only because locating each door encourages exploration, but the ring count key also insists that the player familiarizes themselves with the tracks down to each trail or cache of rings. It's truthfully the only reason that this game has rings. I mean, that's objectively not true, considering that the tracks have these weird speed panels that launch players along a projected path, the length of which determined by how many rings they have to spend when they cross. But these aren't nearly as cool as they might lead on. For one, the length and speed of each boost really isn't significant enough to make or break a race like traditional speed-ups. It's more of a break from the game than anything else, with the game taking control away from you to guide you along a certain length of path. And then I think there's only one in each track? Really, the alternate pathways opened up by the locked doors tend to offer far more of an opportunity of advantage for players than the speed boost can. Chaos Emeralds to be collected or otherwise. It's really too bad about these controls though. They will fuck you up when all you're trying to do is just nudge yourself into one of these things. Control execution aside, I think that the exploration mechanics encouraged by Sonic R's level design through means of alternate pathways and in-game collectibles are not just interesting, but legitimately successful. The value in the variety and replayability of the divergent nature of each track alone is heavily strengthened by the component of single-player collectibles, not just in providing a provisional reason to explore the depths of the game's offerings, but effectively adding to the game's sense of excitement and reward by creating a sense of tension with those same provisions of victory to keep the Chaos Emerald or to access the race with the unlockable racers. Radical City's level design in particular lends itself to this really well, the forking freeway inspired course forcing the player to scramble to remember and act on the location of each Sonic coin or unlockable door in a way that's perfectly evocative of those old arguments between your parents over whether or not they're getting off at the right exit on the freeway. That shit just works, not only in distinguishing Sonic R as its own within the racing genre, but in really putting forward that whole Sonic thing. Yeah, I can't help but think that there are these other games I really like that are all about
taking the time to slow down in an otherwise speed-centric experience while you explore.
This is a point in favor of Sonic R that I cannot stress enough. While the level design of each course and the inclusion of in-game collectibles certainly makes the game look goofy in comparison to traditional racing games, it can't be overstated how well the inclusion of these mechanics lends itself to effectively making the game feel like a proper Sonic the Hedgehog experience. How the level design and inclusion of a Chaos Emerald mechanic resonates with each individual player's Sonic fanometer will of course be up to their own personal discretion, but if nothing else, credit must be given for a commendable, if not earnest, attempt at translating the mechanics of those Genesis classics into a 3D playing space. A fucking racing one at that. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of shit going wrong here, but at its best, Sonic R is a more than serviceable interpretation of the franchise's legacy brought into a 3D racer. One that could arguably be seen as more faithful than the proper main 3D entries at times. I mean, just look at this. You can actually spin down an incline to overtake another racer for the lead. You isolate this in a vacuum, and this alone is a smoking gun of success for a 3D Sonic racer. Of course, there is no accounting for taste. I formulate this defense of Sonic R's mechanics simply to sift for whatever inherent worth that they might hold. I'm not really looking to convince the most grizzled of Mario and Andretti's Racing Challenge veterans that they need to feel bad for have never gotten their way through Sonic fucking R. Still, all I'll ask for is to give the game a proper chance while you leave your expectations of typical racing game fare at the door and meet all of its Sonicisms halfway. I mean, and if that request really is too challenging, there's always the instruction manual to fall back on. And yeah, all of Sonic R's seemingly mystifying quirks and irregularities are explained in black and white within the manual. Though I've got to say, man, this is one unusually cheeky instruction booklet. It goes out of its way on multiple occasions to let you know that this mechanic might have more depth than let on. It even asks, what's a Sonic game without Chaos Emeralds? It's funny. A very unusually self-aware manual, which was the style at the time. This is 1997 we're talking about after all. I mentioned earlier that the title screen as well as the first track incorporate full-length, studio-quality pop songs, complete with vocals. And this holds true for the rest of the in-game soundtrack as well. These tracks were composed by Richard Jacques, who had already been making a name for himself at Sega Europe, with vocals performed by British singer TJ Davis. As for how the hell it all came to be in the first place, if my interpretation of this old Sega Saturn magazine is correct, Jacques was always going to be the man for the job, but was asked to prioritize a theme song in time for an E3 1997 showing. Yuji Naka, then lead producer of Sonic Team, allegedly loved the track so much that he insisted the faux vocals pop approach be used for the whole game soundtrack. To say that this decision was polarizing would be an understatement. There's not enough academia in the world to overcome a simple lack of resonation towards something. That said, on my end, I have always had a difficult time empathizing with folks that apparently can't ease up and just take these tunes for what they are and just have a good time with them, man. Yeah, Supersonic Racing and Can You Feel the Sunshine have gotten by on meme clout, but I have always been able to put these songs on and have a blast, irony not included.
Regurgitate, which is what you'll want to do when you hear that cheery pop song.
The Eurodance pop ballad approach is still absolutely jarringly odd, man. Don't get me wrong. All of the lyrics have this mystic sense of romanticism. This shit hits like a Radio Disney album, honestly. Of course, there are more rigid elements of the sound design that must face scrutiny. For one, the decision to include full-length, studio-quality vocal tracks really does clash with the pacing of a racing game. It's not unusual to be about a quarter of the way through the race, only as the first verse is really starting to begin. Really, the only way that you'll be listening to these songs in full in-game is by sucking at the game, taking longer to complete each race. That said, if you're grinding the game to place first, earn the collectibles, and unlock additional racers, there's a good chance that you'll just be hearing that first half of the same song over and over again for like up to 10-15 minutes. There are worse things, certainly, but if you weren't a fan of the lovey-dovey, hippy-dippy vocals in the first place, I mean, this certainly isn't going to make you feel any better about them. Which is precisely why there's an option to turn off the vocals and leave the instrumentals in the first place. Well, how about that? If you don't like them, you can just turn them off. Weird to me, but hey, if it's not your thing, it's not your thing. And look, man, I really do get it if this just isn't the kind of stuff that you tend to put on right away. With regards to those that did play this as an adolescent, this stuff really makes for some prime please don't let dad walk in on me playing Radiant Emerald material. I gotta say though, I've always seen any attempts to stamp the whole soundtrack as bad, as really disingenuous. This is Richard Jacques we're talking about, man. Give him some credit. Yes, the decision to include pop ballad vocals is unusual for a racing game, but beneath that is a solid OST brimming with a professional sheen that's really built on top of some solid fundamentals of music making. Solid chord progressions, funky as fuck synth modulations, slam dunk melodies, and, if you're inclined, knockout vocals performed by one strongly pipe-ed British lady. Really put more respect on TJ Davis's name. The lyrics themselves are as schlocky as it gets, but each performance on every track is a genuine display of vocal prowess. A very talented duo, one that would team up again to produce tracks for Metropolis Street Racer on Dreamcast, another racing game, this time developed by, funnily enough, the very studio whose work inspired this project in the first place, Bizarre Creations. What do you know? Oh, and I guess every character is always making some constant noise while they accelerate, like big clumping footsteps or Tails' tails whirling. Maybe not the best sound direction decision. In addition to the relative objectivity of controller jank and the subjectivity of unusual sound direction, Sonic R does make several more concessions as a game. For one, the character balance is just a total shit show. The game's honestly like a brawl tier list. There's so much distance between the characters that definitively hold all of the advantages and the characters that hold all of the disadvantages. Super Sonic is gated behind the typical unlock of collecting all of the Chaos Emeralds, but once he is unlocked, he is very literally a play and win character. It's one of those rosters where they go for the straight in-universe canon capabilities of each character rather than the let's actually make sure that all of these characters are fun to play approach. Meaning that characters outside of the speedsters are just kind of made to be significantly less viable because of their struggle to keep up. The game tries to make good for these characters with gimmicks like speed boosts or projectile weapons, but they really don't see much use at all. Egg Robo can't even jump. Even if you're playing with a house no Super Sonic rule, two of the unlockable racers, Metal Sonic and Mecha Knuckles, neatly take his place, as save for a few intended disadvantages, compared to their organic counterparts, they're just as good, if not actually a little bit better. If I'm being honest, the two-player mode on original Saturn hardware is something of a no-go anyway. The visibility of levels teeters on becoming guesswork. This was probably a smidge more tolerable back in '97, but I don't think that anybody would contest you if you said that this was a deal breaker today. The original Saturn version as a whole has a really tough time holding up to modern scrutiny. It's too bad because the Saturn version has some Saturn-specific flair going on that's absent from future releases. For one, the lighting is much more dynamic in ambience. Individual light sources are colored and reflect onto the textures of the environment. This isn't entirely absent from later versions of the game, but just because of how lighting was handled in non-Saturn ports, the effect was considerably subdued. Hell, one of the game's original claims to fame isn't even in later releases. The unlockable track, Radiant Emerald, has this really cool effect where the track itself is a semi-transparent polygon with a transparent overlay on top, in order to do some very Sega Saturn specific faux multi-texturing trickery. It very much adds to the ethereal dreaminess of the atmosphere that the track aims to portray. This was a common point of glowing reverence from the critical scene at launch, and just because of where PC 3D acceleration was at the time, solid polygons were used for the track at later releases, not only removing the transparency effects entirely, but also overlaying the fucking Windows Movie Maker color spectrum effect over it. And there was this really cool reflective chrome Sonic head that, again, was really impressive for the Saturn to be doing. This was replaced with a wavy flag. It's funny because on all other fronts, the PC version is the superior version. Higher resolutions, larger texture bitmaps, increased polygon counts, further draw distances, you know, the usual massive increase in performance quality. It's one that makes Sonic R a lot more palatable, in my opinion. An improvement that I think really pushes the game to being proper pretty. In that low poly, texture terry, late 90s standard def way. I think that the 2D backgrounds are genuinely gorgeous. The various isolated mountain ranges are pulled right from the classic's title screens and are punctuated by a gently rippling reflection that encroaches from the horizon. It's very video gamey in that it's obvious that you're in a confined play space surrounded by nothingness, but the bits of window dressing like tropical trees in Resort Island or the Egyptian-inspired architecture of Regal Ruin go a long way in contributing to an overall sense of atmosphere. Alongside little additional details that tend to go overlooked when you're just normally whizzing by. I love the little flocks of flickies that are just vibing out, having a good time. The roar of this waterfall that's coming from apparently nowhere. Regal Ruin's got these crackling torches about. Reactor Factory is lined with traffic cones that get knocked all over the fucking place. And Radiant Emerald is still really cool even without the transparency effects. This one's done a huge favor by the increased draw distance, as this was the one track in the Saturn version that wasn't able to utilize the fade-in style of asset rendering used throughout the game. I haven't even mentioned the PC port's weather system yet. The weather on the tracks will sometimes be randomly set to either rainy or snowy. The snowy conditions in particular are great. Every asset within the level, from the ground textures to the environment geometry, even to the collectibles, is redone to be covered in snow and crystallized ice. The kicker is that in addition to being fucking gorgeous, the snowy weather even freezes whatever water might be on the track, opening up previously unavailable, albeit slippery, traversable areas of the track. That is so cool. It did not have to do this. This is some genuine above and beyond performance from the PC team. I don't know if they just had extra time or budget. Maybe Yuji Naka rushed in at the last second and demanded it after he hit his head hanging up a clock or something. I wish I had more to say about the increased polygon models. There's definitely enough of an improvement, but the models themselves are still a showcase for the Saturn's unique quads-focused way of handling 3D polygons. Sonic has popsicle hands. This PC port would serve as the basis for the version of Sonic R included in Sonic Gems Collection, which is the version of the game I played as a kid, as well as the version I captured for this video. What a cool collection that was, man. I can't shy away from my Z-Lennial roots. I'm absolutely of the generation that was familiar with Sonic, hashtag Sega Smash Pack 2 gang, but I didn't really get due diligence with the franchise until the GameCube Adventure ports, as well as the spectacular Sonic Mega Collection. The Gems Collection really felt like a proper successor to that one. I remember games like Sonic R, Sonic CD, Sonic the Fighters. They were something of lurking legends for the series. They weren't readily available through official means at the time, and I was only made aware of their existence in the first place because of things like Mega Collection's History of Sonic video. In a way, Gems Collection almost felt tailor-made for the new generation of 21st century Sonic fans like myself. Any Joe Normie can be satisfied with a Genesis ROM collection, but those that found themselves with a newfound insatiable taste for blue Hedgehog flesh would be the ones that really appreciated this collection of deep cuts. And a bunch of Game Gear games too. Neat. The museum trounces Mega Collections too. It's a lot of the same art that was used in Sonic James Museum, alongside official art renders for each game of the collection, concept art, music remixes, yeah, a bunch of cool shit. I got this collection for, I think it was like my 11th birthday or something, and I played this shit out of it. I was truthfully still too crap at classic Sonic to fully appreciate Sonic CD, and I thought that Sonic Fighters kind of just sucked. For whatever reason, Sonic R was the game I played the most in Sonic Gems Collection. Not particularly because I loved it or anything. I think I was just drawn to how short all of its content actually is. That, and actually getting a new game for keeps isn't all that common when you're a kid. At least it wasn't for me. You just have to get more out of your games when you're a kid, even if they're not all that great. So even if I didn't fall in love with Sonic R then, I was more than happy to put in time with it. And that holds true today. The game's really only like an hour long after all. I found it to be a unique, if a little unapproachable experience that had quite a bit to show after taking some getting used to. Sonic R arrived far too late in the Saturn's lifetime to convince anybody that it was still worth rushing out to buy. For the true Sega faithful, it was the long-awaited, if not unexpected, brand new, fully original 3D Sonic the Hedgehog experience. But for many others, it was just some racing game. Oh, and there was one more game that came out in November 1997 that really was not going to do Sonic R any favors. Yeah. That'll do it. I like Sonic R. I don't think it's the greatest racing game in the world, but then I don't think that it ever needed to be. When met on its own terms, it's a unique take on a popular genre using a familiar character. Its weaknesses in 1997 may have been harder to reconcile with as an overdue experience on new hardware, but decades removed from a media hype cycle, I think the game is harmless, if not actually a little bit enjoyable. I really don't believe that anybody can come from playing Sonic R being any worse for wear. While there are much better games you can be playing, there's certainly far worse. A complete playthrough of the single player mode won't cost you much more than an hour, maybe two. It's not like approaching the game now comes off as a massive investment that fails to yield a return. I appreciate Sonic R for what it is. As a reworked Formula 1 project, as a racing game that sought to truly implement the mechanics of its source material, and for that thumping ass soundtrack. It's kind of a bummer that Sega hasn't slated it for a re-release in over a decade. I really do recommend that everyone that fancies themselves a Sonic fan gives Sonic R a shot. I really do resent how much of a reputation the game has garnered for just being that Sonic racing game that sucks because everybody knows it sucks. I think it's up to games like Sonic R to remind us that 1997 never happened in the first place. That for the only time in the franchise's history, there was this interim period between what Sonic the Hedgehog had been and what it would become, where the Sega faithful would continue to wait with bated breath for the Hedgehog's big premiere on an arguably dying console. It's been just as long since I revisited the game, and I found that I like it quite a bit. Sonic R is evocative of Sonic the Hedgehog as a whole, never settling for what already is, moving from place to place, idea to idea, with an almost reckless abandon for how much reward will truly rise from the risk. And that to me will always be number one.